Welcome to the latest episode, episode 50 of Lean In Leander. So when I started this podcast, the intent was to create a vehicle that would allow me to discuss and introduce people to some of the more interesting folks in the city, as well as some of the subject matter that many of us may discuss either socially or in various social media channels. It was an attempt to bring out some additional information or to maybe shine a light on a few subject matters that would, I hope, help people make decisions as far as, what they think about the city, which direction we're going in. Obviously, if you're familiar with Vote in Leander, the candidates give you a little bit of a different take on the candidates than some of the political type of information that's generally out there. So I'm really pleased at the fact that we've reached 50 episodes. I am encouraged by the fact that there's a ton of other things that I still want to talk about and maybe shine a light on. So definitely appreciate those of you who have joined me on this journey as I continue, and continue to visit the website and visit the podcast or YouTube channel or Facebook, however it is that you consume the material that we develop here. I thank you very much for doing so. Please continue to do that and encourage your friends and neighbors to maybe do the same. So all those likes, all those subscribes definitely help the process. Now, with that in mind, I am today featuring the Leander Foundation. Now, I do want to have full transparency on this. I'm actually a board member on the Leander Foundation. Mr. Carlos St. James, who founded that particular effort, kind of kept at me until he wore me down and I decided to join. It's just a small effort for a great group of volunteers, and I do my little part and I let him make a lot of the decisions and decide which direction the foundation goes. And part of that conversation, we've been talking about having him on the podcast, and we're finally able to make that work. So today's content will cover the Leander Foundation. I think you'll find it fascinating, the efforts that Carlos is directing in that particular area. He has a really fabulous backstory and a lot of previous experience in building these types of organizations. So I'm really happy to be part of it. I'm really happy to work with them. And I hope that you get some information from this particular episode that may encourage you to either join the Leander Foundation in our efforts or maybe bring us one of your ideas, because you'll find that the foundation is actually intended to help others as much as it is its own pursuits. So with that said, I want to thank you again for joining me today and enjoy this episode on the Leander Foundation with Mr. Carlos St. James. So I'm here with Carlos St. James at his lovely abode, and we are going to talk a bit about the Leander Foundation today. So Carlos, thank you so much for the time. I do appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
I know we've talked about this for a while. Our involvement with the foundation. Again, I kind of outlined this a little bit before, but you asked me to join back when my daughter was getting married, and I was like, let me hold off a little bit. So, but it's been a wonderful experience for me so far in kind of just figuring out how to get things going. So I want to again thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, my pleasure. It's an exciting organization, isn't it?
No, I think so. I think it's a really good idea. So let's take a step back and what was it that prompted you to say we need something like this in Leander?
Yeah, well, not to take it too far back, but I think we could actually thank Benjamin Franklin for this. I think when I was in college, I read his autobiography, and I was blown away. It was one of those life-altering kind of things. And the thing about Benjamin Franklin, besides the fact that he had an incredible IQ, is that he was there living in Philadelphia, and he would just come up with these ideas like, I need to get mail going from point A to point B. And he just invented the U.S. postal system, just like that. And then he saw that their streets were too dark at nighttime. And so he went neighbor to neighbor saying, hey, let's put some posts up with some lamps, hire a guy to turn them on and off during the day at nighttime. And boom, suddenly we started having lighted streets. And he did this with a series of things, right? He just kept inventing things, and he was fearless. And I was captivated by saying, my God, this is the way to live your life. I've been brought up by my parents to be very involved civically, give something back to your community always. And then reading this saying, geez, this is how to do it. You just do it. There's no and of course it's nerve-wracking. It's, we're all afraid of failure and things like that, but the ability to do that, and my life has been, in my career rather, has been about energy by and large, actually, and I've created different organizations. I helped start the Argentine Renewable Energies Association. I did then the same in Washington for a Latin America Energy Association. By a weird chance, I actually happened to know Bill Richardson, the ex-Secretary of Energy of the U.S. from way back in the day. Well, he and I got together, and we came up with this idea. This is like another one we created the Middle East America's Energy Council to see if we could actually get funds flowing back and forth exactly where they need to go. And so it's been something that I've been very involved in forever, kind of thing. And this was a natural next step. I moved to Leander just 2.5 years ago, so I'm truly a newbie here in town, and immediately fell in love with it. How can you not fall in love with Leander? It's such a great town. It's growing, and I got immediately involved in a bunch of projects with Parks and Recreations and then economic development. You and I cross paths a lot. This is how we got to know each other, right? And what you see is a city that's going through all these growing pains, right? It's going from having been a sleepy little town, and now suddenly it's growing. Everybody's moving here because it's affordable real estate. It's like kind of the offshoot of Austin in some way or the other. And it's a difficult thing. The city needs all the help it can get. And so creating this foundation of 501c3, et cetera, that could help the city and just take on different passion projects just seemed like an obvious need.
The Benjamin Franklin explanation gave me a completely new insight to you, because I'm always like, Carlos, you got too much going on. Like, I'm more of a all right, let's find a problem, let's find one thing, let's solve for that. We can start talking about this other stuff, but let's start with something. So you want some action, you want something that you see tangible results, but who's to say which is the better of the two approaches? Because again, with my experience so far with the foundation, there's a lot of things that you guys are touching. And, I want to kind of highlight a few of those things as we move forward. But that helps explain how you are approaching this. And I think for a lot of people who might be curious who might be foundation curious, that would be something that would be interesting to them to know that, hey, we're not just talking about one specific thing. We're talking about potentially building a support system for philanthropy in Leander. And I think to me, that's what appeals to me. Being on the board is just like, hey, I do want to see us be successful with a couple of things. And there's some minor successes that we can point to already. But I like the approach from that perspective. But I'll be honest, I get a little nervous sometimes because you got like so much going on. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's way too much. But
it's a thing actually, and because we struggled with the organization's new, right? We've only been around for a year and a half or so, and in coming up with the mission statement, that was a thing unto itself, and it defined us really. We ended up coming up with a very broadly defined mission. Our mission statement is along the lines of promoting the sustainable growth of Leander for the betterment of its citizens, right? Something very, very broad. If we had defined ourselves very narrowly, like we're here to save the puppies of Leander, right? It'd be very clear what we have to do.
Right.
But because we're so broadly defined, it's anything and everything. And now that we're in this early stage, it actually works against us a little bit because we're scattered, right? Which is a little bit like I am, right? We're just like, any project that's good, let's see if we can get some, some credibility behind it and push it going forward. In the long run, it'll, I think, be ideal and perfect. But right now, we on the board are all struggling because we're trying to figure out who are we really, kind of thing, because it's so broad.
Well, that helps kind of bring up the next topic. Is like, well, how is it that because it is primarily your brainchild, how is it that you're identifying projects for support or potential support of the Leander Foundation?
Okay, it was born specifically of being on the board of the Parks and Recreations Committee, right? I have a great love of nature and parks and this and that. I think it's just a perfect place, especially for a town like ours that there's a lot of kids, right? So you need to have baseball fields, soccer fields, trails where you can ride your bicycle with mom and dad, all this stuff. And once I got inside the committee there, I realized that we are woefully short on park acreage. And that's where the seed was initially placed. I realized, oh my God, the city is going for more water, for more infrastructure, the basic things. And buying parkland, which has gotten expensive, it just never makes it to the top of the list. And I said, okay, there's a need. Let's create another organization that we can raise money. And my initial idea was actually very large. Let's raise $10 million and just buy a big old piece of land and donate it to the city, and boom, right? Turns out it's a little more complex than that, especially for a startup, right? You can't incorporate and then
Right.
like in 2 weeks raise $10 million. So one of the many learning lessons is let's start small, right? So we're doing things like, hey, let's actually help the city build an all-inclusive park kind of thing. But it was born out of this realization that we're so short on parks, and the parks budget never is as big as it could or should be, and that's just the reality of it. It's not that anyone's ignoring it. It's just there's a need in a rapidly growing city, and we're here to help on that. And that's kind of was the very seed of having that passion.
So speaking of seeds, because that's a really good pivot point. So one of the early projects that the foundation was involved with is supporting the seed library at the public library,
Yeah.
which I think a lot of people might know about in general, but have never really thought about it because it's a pretty prominent little display within the library. If you ever go to the library, there's a box basically.
The old-fashioned card.
Yeah, it's an old-fashioned like print box with a bunch of little drawers.
Where the library cards used to be
Absolutely,
back in the day. Yeah.
absolutely. And so they've repurposed that, and there's seeds in there. So it's a publicly available. There's no cost to this. And if you're a gardener or you want to plant a flower, or maybe you want to do a little, I always show my age, a victory garden. You can go to the library and you can actually find the seeds, which is really kind of it's a rural kind of small town thing, but it's nice. And I know that one of the first things that the foundation did was, pick up a few bucks and buy a bunch of seeds. And so I know that on a monthly basis is what
We
we're
do on
doing.
a regular basis, and it's a perfect example. We went from like, okay, we're going to raise $10 million to like, okay, this is a $100 a year project,
exactly.
right? It's like the other end of the
Exactly.
spectrum. And it came out of like, we're doing the massive brainstormings, right, with the board members. And it was Kat Howell, who's one of our board members, who said, hey, do you know that like talking about parks and all the seeds and plants and community gardens was another thing that we went off. She said that the library has a seed library. And I said, what is a seed library? I didn't even know what it was. And it turns out it's a library. You have to return the seeds, right? So you borrow some tomato seeds, you plant them, and then supposedly a year later, in theory, you're supposed to return seeds, right? In practice, it doesn't happen. The library doesn't really expect you to return seeds, but it's a great thing. It's also a great way for parents to teach their kids about how vegetables grow and this and that. And so we sat down with the library. They said, yeah, it's kind of neglected. No one really pays attention to it. So we said, you know what? We'll buy a bunch of seeds for all kinds of different things. So there's a bunch of cool options for everybody. And let's promote it on social media, and then little by little we'll get more people to get involved with their kids, because it's very much a parent-child kind of thing. And that's how that one was born.
Yeah, and to me it highlights I think in general, I don't want to say specifically this is something that the foundation is necessarily positioning themselves as, but in general it is that public-private kind of approach. Because as much as we as taxpayers will, want the city or want our government to provide as much as, everything that we want, all the conveniences in life per se, the reality is that the budgets don't necessarily allow for that, or the budget focuses don't necessarily allow for it. I think that's more the case here in Leander, is because of the rapid growth, because of the just explosion in need.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it was previously neglected, but I would say it's previously neglected. It was just one of those things, and I don't blame it. I don't think that there was anybody who was consciously not spending money or not budgeting for infrastructure. Just the mechanism and the purview of what they were dealing with was so much smaller.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. When you're the fastest growing city in the United States,
the whole country,
that's crazy growth. Like,
yes.
to get that moniker, that's crazy growth, because there are areas of the country that are expanding quite readily. But with that said, those are the small little things that you can do as a citizen to, just help out a little bit more. Just do that extra little thing. And to your point, this is a really inexpensive project, and easily to volunteer for. I mean, it's a quick trip to Lowe's or whatever to buy some seeds. Basically that's it.
And donate them.
Donate them.
Very much. Yeah.
Let's be honest, that's a tax write-off at the end of the year. Et cetera, so forth, so on. So it is a good community initiative, and I think it's reflective of what the foundation is trying to do, like in general. One of the other projects that I was really, really interested in, and I thought this is a really interesting way to look at things, is the oldest trees in Leander.
Yes.
Which is something that when you first told me about it, I was like, well, that's kind of a fascinating thing to think about.
This tree, 300 years old, and it tells the story here. This thing is older than when the U.S. declared its independence, 4th of July, 1776. This was already a big tree. And since then, and before that, there's Native Americans and Spanish conquistadores, and then Mexicans and the French along the way came here as well. And finally, the settlers, mostly Germans who came this way. All of these over the last 300 years at some point have rested under the shade of this tree. There's a magnificent story here. This tree has seen so much stuff here. And now, of course, it falls to us suburbanites to also rest under the tree. It's a great story. We're hoping to repeat it at a bunch of different sites here as well, and just develop a sense of history, loving of conservation, of pride in our community, in our town, and that's about it. So with that, may I? This is my kitchen. There we go, thank you.
You look around and you look at the farmland out here and you look at the hill country and stuff like that, and there's all these beautiful trees and old growth. Yes. And, you know, obviously we want to try to conserve as much of that as we possibly can, but the realities of modern day living and development, sometimes it's to your point, it's easier to facilitate a penalty, or to pay a penalty, yeah, and just cut everything down, yeah, than to work around it.
Yeah.
I always credit the builders that are willing to work around some trees. Yeah. I mean, I can't save everything, but there is opportunity there. But anyway,
it's not an easy thing actually, because the developer's here to make money, right? And so they have to balance a lot of things, and it's not an easy balance to find, right? Where they're trying to maximize their return, as they should, but also conserving. This city there's so much history here. There's so much, and the word conservation isn't in our mission statement, but it may as well be, really, because a lot of what we do is conserving those traditions, that history, that pride in these trees. And when we found these, we just found the first batch of 10 trees, right? Mm-hmm. We partnered up with Texas A&M Forestry Service. Basically, they asked us to measure trees and take 1 million photos, and then they told us how old any given tree is, and they give us usually a range. And so we reached out to the community. People would write us saying, hey, I have an old tree in my backyard, or my grandma, or this or that. And we found these 10 trees. The oldest one is like about 250 years old. It's mm-hmm. Texas live oak. It's actually older than the United States. So imagine the things that tree has seen, that it's lived through. It would be tragic, and it's a beautiful tree. Right?
It is a beautiful tree.
It's a giant, beautiful tree. It suffered this last freeze as well. Actually, it lost some big branches. It's still fine, but it's painful to see. And so people get behind that project really well. Plus, it's one that actually doesn't cost a lot of money. We're just tracing it down. We're actually getting Texas A&M to help us for free. And so we can actually keep on putting plaques on these trees and officially making them, like, designating an official old tree of Leander. And it just makes us more proud in our community, and it has nothing but good for what we want to keep in our, like, the traditions of Leander.
And it's unique, because I don't know of anything like that anywhere else in the general area, in the region, because to be perfectly frank, there's a lot of those big trees. I mean, they're everywhere. And in certain, you go into the city, you go into Austin, and there are facilities or concert halls or even Zilker Park where there's these massive old trees, and you don't think about it necessarily, but yeah, they're 250, 300 years old, and that's kind of there's something unique about that from a heritage perspective, but also from a conservation perspective, just to kind of point out, hey, some of this old growth is really old growth. There's some really probably interesting things when you think about it, like, well, who came and sat underneath this tree? Exactly. You never know.
How many travelers, settlers,
pioneers, Native Americans,
have rested
who knows?
Under the massive shade of those trees. It's like we have to honor these traditions. There's really no other way. It's part before it's gone, because if someone doesn't do something, they're going to get cut down or just left by the wayside, and that would truly be tragic.
That would be tragic.
As beautiful as Leander, with the potential that it has, we're destined to be a big city. There's mm-hmm. really no stopping it. Mm-hmm. We can manage it as best possible, right? Mm-hmm. And doing things like this, like, hey, let's set aside a little space so we can just love on these old trees.
Well, and I think it has the potential, again, to be something that, from a long-term perspective, maybe not anybody's necessarily thinking about it that way today, but for tourism. Take a tour of the mm-hmm. oldest trees in Leander, and they're actually indicated, like, throughout the city, and that helps with that attracts certain people to the area. They want to, hey, let's go look at those trees, or let's take the kids or whatever. And that's business, and that's an economic development and an economic impact. Maybe not intentional from the perspective of the conservation of it, but I think it's always important to talk about those things, because I think people neglect to talk about those things, that there is an economic impact to making some of these efforts.
And it's increasingly tying into history too, because one of the trees we found actually is very close to, if not actually where the infamous Webster massacre happened in 1860s, I think it was, which is a terrible thing. But there's history there in those trees. There's another one actually is close to where, what is it, the Leander Lady was discovered.
Lucy,
so suddenly
right?
we're tying in these trees to actually historical pieces of. I wish there was a big old tree over by the dinosaur tracks. Then something we've got it made, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think there is.
No, that would be nice. That would be nice. So we'll find one. Maybe not 200 years old, but but that also kind of points again, and I wanted to kind of spend our time and looking at what the foundation has already done. And one of the other aspects of the foundation is the work that the foundation has done in supporting efforts to have Leander join like the Keep Texas Beautiful. So now there's Keep Leander Beautiful. It's actually something that's going on, and I don't think a lot of people realize that this is an ongoing effort. So tell me a little bit about that and what the foundation's involvement is there.
Sure. It's part of like a lot of what we do, and you of course know this well, is that it makes all the sense in the world for us to partner up, right? We're small, we're an itty-bitty little organization. And so partnering up with other organizations that are bigger and more established makes all the sense in the world. And once I was actually just surfing the web looking for grants, right? I'm basically looking for money that I can use for the foundation for different projects. I came across the Keep Texas Beautiful website, which has been around since the 1960s. A couple housewives in Fort Worth, Texas decided that something had to be done with the litter in their town back in the 1960s, and they created this thing that turned into Keep Texas Beautiful, which now has some 300 cities in Texas part of it. And I said, you know what, there's a great idea. Leander doesn't have its own chapter of Keep Leander Beautiful, which is part of Keep Texas Beautiful. And so basically I filled out the paperwork, did it, and suddenly we have this other sister organization, which now we're forming a board for. It's taking on its own projects, and I'd say within the next year, it'll just branch off and be its own entity doing its own projects of beautification as they define it, because it's its own board. And by the way, we are looking for board members and people who have a love for this kind of thing. And beautification is also as narrowly or broadly defined as you want it to be. So there's really room to doing a lot of great things on this one as well. They took on the project. One of the first ones actually was because of the seed program at the library. We were talking to the people there, and they said, we never get funding to paint the walls of the library. And so then suddenly they came up with the idea, the Keep Leander Beautiful people, of getting in touch with high school kids here in Leander. And in the end, I think it's actually happening in the next weekend or two, they're actually going to paint the windows in the library with like motifs for kids and things like that. It's been approved by the city and everything. So there's all these networks of things that happen that you never know what way it's going to go. You just talk to people, and you know how networking just happens. And but anyway, partnerships is indeed, and I can certainly talk to you about our partnerships with We Are Blood, that we're doing some campaigns, and Leander Leaders, and with the Rotary Club. There's just, the more you look, the more you find, and it just works better for everybody.
So one of the principal ideas behind the foundation is to become a resource for funding. So, there's our experience in dealing with some of these challenges and some of the conversations that emanate from those challenges. We've constantly unearthed the need for grant writing, or people who are familiar with grant writing,
right?
Because there is, to your point, a number of opportunities available within various structures, various governmental foundations, government agencies, other philanthropies. I mean, there's a lot of places where you can write a grant and basically secure funding. But there's not a whole lot of people who know how to do that very well.
It's an art unto itself.
It is.
Yes.
It can be a very complicated process depending on where you're going to look for that particular funding. But much like college scholarships, there's a lot of them out there. You just got to go and find them and have a mechanism. And your example of Keep Leander Beautiful is a perfect example of when it is done, and you do ask the questions, that typically there's an opportunity there. So I know that the foundation is intended to become a mechanism for smaller philanthropies or smaller organizations who, may not have the wherewithal to be able to do that on the regular basis. So one of the things that we talk about, and we've talked about it in board meetings before, is getting more people involved. And so I'd like to take this opportunity, and while we're talking about it, is like, how would someone, just Joe Guy on the street, who has an idea for a foundation, or maybe he's working with a small group already, how would he contact the Leander Foundation and look for assistance, or look to leverage some of that knowledge that we've already accrued?
Contacting us is actually easy. You just go to our website. It was at www.leanderfoundation.org. And the website there has different ways to get in touch with us. Otherwise, write us an email, info@leanderfoundation.org. That actually comes to me one way or the other. And I promise, no matter what I get, I will write and kind of start that ball rolling and see if there's something we can do. It's like, there's you touched on an important thing. Ours is a very wealthy society, and Americans are very generous people. So having this formal legal entity that's a real 501c3 and all this, we do our taxes every year, we can tap into money out of Washington, out of Austin, out of big corporations, the HEB Foundation. There's any number of them. That some of them focus on certain kinds of projects, right? My own passion happens to be parks, recreations, and conservation related. So I gravitate towards looking for big old foundations or wealthy families who like to donate for that. But there's a ton of money. There is a ton of money out there that if you ask the right way, if you fill out the grant forms in the proper way, you can get the money. And then that's money that the city doesn't have to raise for its own thing. We can then actually help the city on these things. And it actually ties also into this other thing is our taxes here are high enough, right? Nobody wants to pay more taxes. It doesn't matter if you're a homeowner or if you rent. The fact is, one way or the other, you're paying for property taxes. And we did this study now. The taxes in Leander are slightly above the average. They did this study of like 505 cities in Texas. Ours are a little bit above average for what we pay. Within Williamson County as well, if you look at like the half dozen bigger cities, we're a little bit on the more expensive side of places to live. And I wouldn't be surprised if it keeps on going up. So the foundation is exactly the kind of organization where if you find the right sources, this is something that rather than keep on increasing our taxes, we can actually just raise money from other sources or from people who really want, saying, I don't want to put my money into this slush fund that is property taxes of the city. I want my money to go specifically to this project here. It could be, let's say, the oldest trees. And we can actually assure people that the money they give will go to the specific project that they have in mind. It's a very efficient way to make your dollars talk for you, kind of what you're interested in and what you're not interested in.
Yeah.
I don't doubt that we'll come along with projects that in the end nobody's particularly interested in. Those will just die by the wayside, and that's okay too.
Right. And you actually bring up a good point, and this is one of the areas that I did want to talk about. How do you as a foundation, or we as a foundation, I guess I should say, full transparency, how do we ensure that transparency to people? Like, how is it that, I know we're not there yet. It's not like we're raising millions and millions of dollars. We're raising hundreds of dollars right now. So, but eventually, at a point in time, and it's fair for someone to ask, "Hey, show us the books." So, what mechanisms are being put in place today to ensure that the foundation remains transparent going forward?
Yes, and I insist on that, as a matter of fact. This hasn't been brought up at a board meeting yet, but I intend to at some point saying, hey, we should publish our financial statements, however pitifully small they are, we should publish them on our website because we have nothing to hide. We're a nonprofit. Nobody's making a salary at this point. We're years away from somebody getting paid. We're all doing this for love, right? As a matter of fact, we're actually, all of us, writing checks once in a while to just keep the thing afloat. So it's not that there's a conflict, and there's no other business or anything like that. What we're doing is we've had, and you'll remember, every board member has signed a conflict of interest policy saying, hey, these are the rules about conflict of interest. If you have a conflict of interest of some kind, just let us know. Come in advance so that you don't vote on that particular issue because it is tied to your business or one thing or the other. We also have a financial controls policy which addresses all these things about how we deal with our bank accounts, what we do, what we don't do. And I would further say, if someone gets involved and they get involved with a project like the oldest trees or pickleball or the all-inclusive playground or something like that, I can assure you people what we'll open is different bank accounts, and anyone who wants to see where the dollar is going, what's coming in and what's going out, I'll happily share that, really. Because transparency, I think, is is paramount, really. If you have anyone doubting what's going on, then suddenly it just dies along the way. So the more transparent we are from the very beginning, and as long as we establish that habit of being transparent and just showing everything, it should be fine.
So currently, the projects that are in flight would be the aforementioned seed library, the oldest trees in Leander, which, when I edit this, I've cut away to some footage of when we actually put up the first signage for that tree. So that's in there. That'll be post. Keep Leander beautiful. And then I know that there's also, you mentioned there's some work with the blood bank. So I know that we've participated
Let me mention that one. Yeah, we've partnered up with We Are Blood, right? There's different options you can partner up. We just get along with We Are Blood. And so we've done a few blood drives already. We're going to continue doing them. We're going to get into the habit of like doing them quarterly or so. Turns out, just for comparison, we do quite well. We, Leander, we donate almost 4% of our population donates blood. And that's pretty much right at the average for Central Texas. There are towns that do it a little bit higher than us. I think it's Round Rock and Georgetown. A higher percentage of their population donates blood. But of course, they've been around longer. They actually have, I think We Are Blood has offices there. So it's a whole lot easier. But I would propose, once we formalize this and we find the people who want to lead this project, if someone has a passion for blood donation and things like that, I say, please come help us. Take leadership of this project, and I would love us to have a goal of let's have the highest level of participation in blood donation in Central Texas. Let's beat out Round Rock and Georgetown. If they're at 5%, well, let's aim for 6% for us in our town. We can do it. It's just a matter of having that plan and dedicating the time and resources to making it happen.
Yeah, so any vampires who want to volunteer for that and take ownership of that particular project,
they'll have to sign the conflict of interest.
I'm kidding. Don't actually believe in vampires. No, but I think, again, I Give Blood. I think that's a great project. I was actually very pleased when We Are Blood opened up a facility in Cedar Park because it is far more convenient for me because I used to have to go to Georgetown to do that, so it's a lot easier for me to donate here. And I know that the blood drives that we've done or that we've participated in or helped organize have been strategically mobile, and they're placed throughout the city. So, when you do see that, the mobile We Are Blood, hopefully Leander Foundation is involved in some way or another. But if you're the type of person who likes to give blood or who will give blood on that occasion, please, we'll do our best to socialize that to make sure people are aware that they're actually happening.
Yes. Another project, just so you forget, public art murals.
Yes.
One of the very first things we did, we barely donated any money, but we helped contribute something. There's a beautiful mural on Crystal Falls Parkway, kind of near Old 183. And we contributed some money to pay for the paint for that project. And we're also looking for more fundraising that pays for the artists. Of course, they have to be local artists, right? We want Leander-based artists developing, ideally young kids and things like that. But that's just another project, just helping the beautification. That project, for example, might actually end up being a Keep Leander Beautiful. We're in the process of divvying up who does what kind of thing. But there's a bunch of those. Another one was vegetable gardens, right? A lot of communities or neighborhoods want to have vegetable gardens. We can do that. We're actually talking to Lowe's to see if we can get like a grant from them to help buy stuff at a discount or something like that so that we can actually start building vegetable gardens in communities. But then they take on themselves and they administer it. We would just kind of put the seed money, so to speak, in and then send them over to the seed library to get the seeds.
Well, and one of the ideas there, and I'll kind of branch off a little bit from foundation type of work, but those are the types of ideas that, in my opinion, begin to have an economic impact on the city. We would love to see, as a member of the board, I would love to see more efforts in that vein coming from the city. These are very simple ideation that can, be a small budget line that help create some of these community-based efforts, which again I think could be very unique and very, very specific to Leander. And I think it also captures what you described earlier as some of that legacy, the feel of the city. Because I'm much like you, I'm new here. I'm a little bit longer in the tooth, so to speak, from a Leander perspective. But that there was something about this little area of Texas that appealed to me. There was just a
it's hard
feeling.
not to love Leander.
It's really
yeah.
it's a nice little town, and there's a lot of things to like about it, and you want to kind of maintain that and preserve that as the city gets larger, because you and I, again, our experiences and where we've crossed paths have been similar. My experience with you has been, you're looking for ways to be involved. You're looking for ways to use your free time to the benefit of the community at large, and we're similar in that particular approach. Because I have time, and as things go, sometimes you have a little bit more time than others,
right?
But you have time, and if you're willing to use that capital in that way. I think a lot of people don't look at it from that particular perspective. Yes. Like for me, it's an investment of my capital. Like this is my capital. I may not be in a
precious commodity.
Absolutely, and I may not be in a position to be able to write the big checks. For instance, I would, if I were in that position, I'd probably be more inclined to do that. It's like, let me help. But the time that it takes to do those same things, again, anything in this city that tends to be looked at from a time perspective, outside of the city staff, the people who actually have the jobs, that's their job, and you get paid for that. Okay, right. But if you're a chamber member, if you're a council member, you're on a committee, right. Those are all volunteer. Yeah. That's all just you being gracious and spending your time helping, hopefully resolve some of the issues or questions that come up, and help in this particular regard. I think I've said it on the podcast several times. When I first got here, I was like, I made the conscious decision to be involved. This was a conscious decision. I could have chosen, no, you know what, I'm going to buy my house, I'm just going to keep it to myself. Right. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Hey, I respect anybody who just leave me alone. Okay, fine. That's not a problem. But for those of us who are a little bit more inclined to be involved in the community and kind of help move and shape what our life is like here, that's the reason that I do it, is like I want to contribute my voice and my ideas to what I hope would be the betterment of the city as a whole. And I think that to the foundation's mission statement is very similar to that.
And that's the thing that actually it's not mentioned explicitly in our website or anything like that, but we discuss it here and there. And I think ultimately the foundation is going to have kind of like two competitive advantages. One, I think we're going to get really good at raising money. We're going to just going to raise money left and right and just find the right projects to make them a reality, to take some pressure off us having to pay the taxes to make this stuff happen. That's one. I want us to get really good at raising money, just really be pros at that kind of thing. And then number two, the other, which is a little more subtle, but is just as important, is I envision this foundation as part of why I helped create this thing, is it's kind of a leader factory. I want to create the leaders of the future, so I very much want young people to get involved, anyone who has the time and energy. I'm an empty nester, so I'm at that stage now where I actually have extra time. It makes all the sense in the world to start nurturing people, let them here on this very small scale we have now, just take on projects and learn about leadership. How do you enroll people? How do you manage people? How do you deal with the multiple conflicts that come up and things like that within a limited budget, right? And this, I think, is going to be one of the great things that the foundation truly can do for Leander, is help create leaders.
No, I think I think to aspire to such heights is absolutely fundamental to the direction that any effort that you make will take. I know there's that adage, shoot for the stars, you'll at least hit the moon type of thing. I was like, well, you probably aren't going to get to the stars anyway. Those are pretty far. So I'm like, let's just get to the moon. Let's just do that.
Well, it's the second floor, right?
Right? It's like, hey, let's just go there. But anyway, no, it was one of the things that appealed to me about the foundation. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to sit on the board. And the confidence that you had in asking me to serve in that particular kind of role, and your diligence in keeping on me until I said yes, because I did like the idea.
You were a hard sell. Yeah,
it was like, I don't know if I have the time, but again, it's just how do you allocate that capital, and so I've decided that this is a worthwhile use of my capital. I know that there's a number of things that you wanted to talk about, but we always, I like to keep people guessing and keep them involved. So I I know that we've already talked about how to get in touch with the foundation, but
info@leanderfoundation.org.
okay, and I think it's important, and I want to kind of wrap on this, is that you touched on youth, and a lot of times I think the young people, and I don't know how many young people necessarily watch my podcast, but if you're a parent and your kid's in high school or something along those lines, and they talk to you about this thing, the Leander Foundation is a perfect opportunity to learn, at the very least, how to do these types of things. And a lot of times I know that when you look at the youth. And I know that youth today is far more activist than they used to be. I mean, and it's just a generational thing. So I think it's incumbent upon us as a foundation to take advantage of that and encourage that. So that's kind of where I want to end. I was like, but how can we encourage the younger people in Leander to bring their ideas to us?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know, other than we need to get the word out as best possible. But it truly is, this organization is a community-based organization. Anyone who has, as long as, I think the only rule is you got to live in Leander. I think that's the only requirement. You got to live in Leander. You just come with your pet project, not your pet project, your passion project. You believe that we need this. We have one, we didn't mention this, one of our board members, Steve, he has this love for, is it soccer? And so basically one of our many projects is to raise scholarships for kids who may not be able to afford signing up for soccer every given year. And so that's another thing. We're raising money for this, and all the money goes specifically to helping kids who might need help and paying the fees, etc., that are related to getting involved in soccer. It's find your passion project and bring it to us.
And that's the Sci-Fair Youth, or not Sci-Fair, I'm thinking Houston. The Leander Youth Soccer Association, right?
That's who we're partnering with.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's super, super interesting because, again, there is an underserved area within Leander. Even within Leander, there's an underserved area or areas within our community where there are young people who, might be inclined to be involved in that type of sport.
Let me throw one more, actually. Just like a week ago, we came across, it turns out, there's a very large group of people who play pickleball. I'm not a pickleball, but it's turning out really big. There's a lot of people that are living in Leander, but to play pickleball, we don't have a single pickleball court. They have to go to Georgetown, they have to go to Cedar Park, etc. And so they came and saying, hey, we want to do something. So we're actually seeing if we can work on things. This is it's so early that the board hasn't even found out about it. But there's a bunch of people who would love to see, let's start raising money, see if we can build a few pickleball courts in Leander, which is, again, it fits. If we can get a corporation to donate, we can get them the receipts because it's tax deductible, because we are a formal 501c3, etc. And then we raise the money, and it's one less thing that the city has to worry about. We can actually help partner and do those kinds of things.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the more important factors in the approach that the board is using and the approach that this foundation is using. And again, we're very, very early in the process. I mean, it's not a thing yet. I mean, we're working towards that.
We're in diapers, as they say.
Right.
Young,
it's very, very much the crawl stage of this particular foundation. But I think the general sense of being able to provide additional resources to tackle the issues, because again, I think there's a lot of factors that point to this type of organization being integral, not only in the short term, but in the long term for Leander as a community, because to your point, we're going to be a big city at the end of the day.
We will create jobs. There will be employees and everything. That we pay salaries and everything. Someday
it's all going to happen. It's inevitable. We almost can't help but to do that. Okay, and you can see the communities around Leander, in Hutto and Taylor and a couple of areas where they've been able to secure larger corporate investment, the Teslas and of the world and whatnot. I think it would be foolhardy for Leander to necessarily say that that's what will happen here. I don't think that happens here. I don't think that we're in a position to necessarily be able to support that. I would question the support in some of those other cities, and that's a longer conversation. But there's a lot of supplemental industry that would come in. And to help support those, there's anytime you have an auto builder, there's supplies, there are training, there's all sorts of things that actually contribute to them being able to do that, and those are other businesses.
Central Texas has, we have, I think, a cluster going on of healthcare.
Yeah,
more and more.
no, that's
so
definitely
you want to
something.
build that, because the more hospitals, the more specialized services, it just generates jobs and more, and we could end up being a cluster for healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful, because those jobs pay well.
Yep.
They're not McDonald's jobs. Nothing
Yep.
against McDonald's,
Right,
but they're
right.
jobs that pay well. Exactly the kind of jobs you want created in our town.
Absolutely. And again, the foundation, while not directly responsible for that, we're not the ones who are creating those incentives and helping draw that, business to the city, but we can support the process of the quality of life in Leander.
Right.
And I think, again, so we go back to, some of the baseline projects that, the seed library, the trees, keep Leander beautiful. Those things are all super impactful. And I personally, as a member of the board and as a citizen of the city, I'm looking forward to seeing what the foundation does, because I'm really excited about what this particular group could potentially accomplish over time. And I think you're just the kind of guy, Ben Franklin, to lead the charge.
I'm just as intrigued as you are. I look forward to seeing how this, because these things take on a life of their own after a while. They just go, and you find the right leaders, and suddenly it just goes in a direction that you would not have anticipated. But it's all going in the right direction, and I too wonder what will be like in 5 years and 10 years. After our time is done, the next generation takes over.
That's right.
Good.
That's right. Well, I appreciate the time today. I hope this has been interesting to you, the podcast listeners and watchers on YouTube and whatnot. So come back for more content. We're trying to keep a monthly pace right now on the podcast. But I'm always, looking for interesting people and interesting topics, and I appreciate the opportunity to bring this to you as a member of the community, and I hope that you find it intriguing. And if you're interested in volunteering or bringing your project to the foundation, you know how to reach us. So
Thank you, Andrew, so much.
thanks a lot, Carlos. I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, sir.
All right, man. We'll see you next time.
I thought I was recording the whole time. Tell me that I wasn't.